about next steps and any interest from this group of folks in continuing a conversation around this issue and maybe taking it to dive as well. So again, welcome. I'm Emily Homan with the Nature Conservancy's Fire Learning Network. Our first speaker is Meg Matonis with the Forest Stewards Guild. And Meg, if you would take us away. Oh, you're on mute, Meg.
Yep, amateur mistake, thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll start sharing my screen. Thanks, Emily, for organizing this. I really enjoyed working on this project with the Washington DNR to learn a lot more about certified burner programs, and I'm excited that it's a topic a lot of people are interested in as more and more programs are coming on and existing programs are looking at ways to revise themselves. So my name is Meg Matonis. I work for the Forest Stewards Guild as the Intermountain West Regional Manager. I've been an on-call firefighter with Larimer County Sheriff's Office for the past 7 years, and I got my PhD in forest ecology from CSU. In February, I went through the Certified Prescribed Burn Manager course in Colorado, so that gave me a lot of really good insights as well as to how these programs are run. And it was a great course because there were landowners and fire practitioners involved. So it was neat to see how the program, met needs of both audiences. So the Washington DNR, Washington Resource Conservation and Development Council, and Washington Dry Forest Fire Learning Network contracted the Guild to compile information about existing programs. And the information for this report came from laws, statutes, agency policies, and other web content from each state. I also read a lot of white papers and journal articles about prescribed burn certification and liability. And then the most informative part was conducting interviews with certified prescribed burn managers from Colorado, Florida, Illinois, North Carolina, Ohio, and Texas. So Greg and John were all on the call. Thank you for the insights you provided. And then I also got feedback from other experts, including Lania. So lots of people who contributed to this report are on the call right now. Here's a list of them. They're also available at the beginning of the report, which Emily included in the attachment. And I also have a link to it at the end of the presentation. So my report focused on states where certified prescribed burn manager programs were mentioned in laws or statutes. So this was a total of 21 states. 15 of these states have active programs. 2 of the states, Oregon and Michigan, have programs on the books, but they did not implement the programs. And then 4 states have programs in development. I wanted to mention there are a lot of states that have informal or formal training programs in burning, but they're not tied to a certification program or tied to liability statutes. So I didn't include those. There's a lot of differences between the existing programs, so I'll highlight those. And I'm not just trying to be diplomatic. There's really excellent aspects of every program from the states that I looked at. And I think states can learn from each other as well. Since some of the states have had these programs for a lot longer than others, they have more experience with what works and what doesn't. There's also a lot of regional differences, and I think as states in the West start developing more of these programs, that this kind of webinar and conversation is really important because conditions are so different in terms of liability, WUI, training requirements, complexity of burns. So yeah, thanks, Emily. I think this is great to keep this going. So the purpose of the programs is to provide training in burning, legitimize the practice of burning, address liability concerns, and then some states explicitly say that their goal is to increase the pace and scale of prescribed burning. Not all of the states really have that as an objective to it, though. It's more ensuring that people who are burning are highly trained and qualified, but not necessarily like increasing the pool of people who are able to burn. The primary audience for these programs are landowners, contractors, and NGOs in a lot of states, state employees, from the people I interviewed, are often half of the participants in the program, and there's other states where only state employees are able to participate in the certification program. So there's a lot of different benefits to the program. The programs are, for the most part, voluntary. Many states have right to burn laws, so private landowners could burn whether or not they're certified. But in 18 of 21 states, you only get liability protection if you are certified. So the limited liability protection is a huge benefit of the course. People also take the class for training and continuing education. Sometimes federal fire managers will take these courses because there isn't really a course geared at like the RxB3 level. So a lot of people want to learn how to do burn planning, and the certification programs at the state level can provide some insights that they wouldn't get through NWCG courses. There's other benefits that some states offer, like certified burners can have extended burning hours later into the evening, expanded burn windows during the year, or they can apply for exemption from county burn bans. And then California, I'm not sure, Lania, last we spoke, you had mentioned that there was some thought about exemption from suppression billing for people who are certified. So maybe you can mention later if that actually is still on the table or not. So in all but 3 states, like I mentioned with certified burner programs, certification is required to receive, certification is required to receive limited liability protection. The exceptions are Ohio, like I think Greg will talk about. There is no prescribed burning law that outlines liability. There's just agency statutes that certify, that establish this program. Georgia has gross negligence that applies to all burners if they have some burning experience, but that's evaluated on a case-by-case basis and doesn't require certification. And then Kentucky has simple negligence that applies to all burners, whether or not you've taken the certification program. Florida is unique in that certification confers gross negligence for if you're certified, and non-certified people are under simple negligence standards. So you get more liability protection if you are certified. So some of the main aspects of the programs are, they vary in the tiers of certifications, the tracks, and prerequisites for certification, what's entailed in the course for certification, and then whether or not they require additional burn experience. And then if there's some alternative paths to become certified. So states vary widely in their requirement for burning experience and coursework, and the report that I compiled has a table that lists out what I could find about the programs and their requirements. I just wanted to say there's a lot of factors that might influence the specifics of state programs and why they vary so much, and some of those could be potential fire behavior or the social and political appetite for prescribed burning. Lessons learned from other states. A lot of states closely follow what Florida pioneered in 1994. And then agency capacity can also shape how these programs are run. Just kind of as an example, certification requirements in Colorado are pretty stringent because of the certification law was passed after the Lower North Fork fire resulted in the death of 3 citizens and destruction of 27 homes. So there's a lot of public concern about prescribed burning. And then there's also, high complexity to burning in Colorado because of fuel and weather conditions. So that might be one reason that Colorado has more stringent standards than some of the states in the Southeast. 3 states offer different levels of certification based on the complexity of burns that people plan to conduct. So in Colorado, there is Certified Burner B, and that allows you to do pile burning. Certified Burner A is for broadcast burning, and to be a Certified Burner A, you have to be an RxB 1 or 2. Florida has a Certified Pile Burn program and a Certified Prescribed Burn Manager program, and the requirements for those are different. And then if you're a certified pile burner, you only have liability when you're conducting pile burns. And then Pennsylvania has 3 tiers based on the complexity of burning, and those closely mirror RxB 1, 2, and 3 under NWCG standards. If any of the acronyms I'm using you're unfamiliar with, maybe you could put that in the chat, and I bet Emily could clarify what some of those are. It's not fair of me to assume that everybody knows the acronym soup of fire management. Okay, so those are the different tiers that dictate the level of burning complexity that you can do under certification. There's also states that have different tracks to certification based on your prior experience. And there's 5 states that require you to have prior experience before you even participate in the program. So the required experience varies between states. So in Georgia, to participate in the program, you need to have led at least 5 prescribed burns within the past 2 years. Whereas in South Carolina, prior experience is evaluated on a case-by-case basis. The 5 states that offer different tracks also evaluate prior experience differently. So in Alabama, prior experience means leading greater than or equal to 5 prescribed burns in the last 2 years. In Florida, it means you've led at least 3 prescribed burns in Florida, or you've participated in at least 5 burns, or you hold RxB2 qualifications, or you're a certified burn manager from another state. And then the track for experienced burners can either be that the course is shorter for experienced burners. In Florida, they have an option to take an online course that non-experienced burners are not allowed to do. And then some states say that you don't need to do as many certification burns after you take the class if you can document that you have prior experience. The topics covered in the Certified Prescribed Burn Manager courses are really similar across the states. So the kind of information that you would expect from S130 and 190, plus learning about burn planning and burning laws and regulations. So they're all specific to the state, except for Illinois, where they really heavily rely on S130 and 190 with a little bit of added information about burn planning and burn laws. But most of the states have developed their programs from scratch. The average length of the course is 24 hours, but some states have 8-hour courses and some have up to 32-hour courses, and that length includes the field experience. Florida is the only state that has the online self-study course. Tennessee has like a hybrid course, so there is some online content, but there's also required in-person instruction. And then for the field component that's tied into the coursework, there's 8 states with field components, and 6 of these include live burn demos. For most of these states, if weather's prohibitive, the live burn demo will be canceled. In Texas, if weather's prohibitive, the instructor needs to reschedule the burn because everybody taking the course needs to participate in a live burn demo before they are able to move on to the next part of the certification process. So after you've taken the course, there are 8 states that require that you acquire additional burn experience. 4 of these states have task books that lay out what people need to do to become certified, and states vary widely in the number of burns that are required and the roles. So some states say you need to participate in a certain number of burns, others say you need to lead a certain number of burns, and others say you need a combination of participating and learning on burns. And some states require that you are conducting these burns under the supervision of a already certified burner. And then there's 4 states that don't require additional burn experience. You just have to take the class and then you're certified. Really quickly, there are some states that, 4 states that offer fast tracks to certification if you're certified in another state that has comparable certification standards. There's also several states that recognize NWCG burn boss qualifications. So you just have to submit proof of your qualifications, and then you, like your IQCS record, and then you can be immediately certified after you pay a small fee. Some states also had temporary grandfather clauses that could certify experienced burners when the program is first being implemented. Just really quickly, some of the programs vary and the length that the certification applies. It's indefinite in many of the states. Others say you have to take continuing education or demonstrate that you participated in burns to maintain your certification. Some states have approaches to decertify people, but most states that I interviewed said they don't have agency capacity to actually enforce the point system for decertification, and it kind of relies on self-reporting or neighbors or other burners reporting on each other. And then quickly, there's some, based on the interviews and then the summary that I produced, I identified some challenges and potential solutions for states that are either wrestling with these issues or considering developing new programs. So one of the first challenges is that there's some experienced burners that are concerned about letting people practice burning without having NWCG certifications. So some ways that states have been able to address that, Lenya wrote an awesome blog post about this and kind of balancing having like an accessible versus a stringent program. And I think some ways that states have addressed trying to balance those two aspects is having multiple tiers to certification. So having it's easier if you want to pile burn than if you want to do broadcast burning. Having a live burn demo or supervised burn opportunities can help increase the confidence that people who are being certified have developed situational awareness and actually practice burning on the ground before they go off and do it on their own. Reviewing burn plans is also a good way for the agency to kind of be a gatekeeper and just make sure that the people who are burning have thought about all the complexities that would be involved in the burn that they're doing. And then having continuing education opportunities so that people can stay current in their understanding of fire behavior and how they write burn plans. And then just keeping in mind, if the goal of the program is to increase the pace and scale of burning, to open the door to more people being able to burn, then you need to be very intentional about how you're balancing accessibility and stringency, because a lot of private landowners who have other jobs are not going to be able to go through an NWCG task book.
Hey,
So
Meg, just 2 more minutes, Meg, if you could.
Okay. So the live burn demo presents a lot of logistical challenges, and I'm sure John will talk about some of that because the Florida program used to include a live burn demo and then no longer does, because weather was not conducive to burning a lot of times. Sometimes there's concerns about liability of the agency when you're conducting burns. There weren't always enough agency people to help supervise the burns, and sometimes there weren't enough landowners with appropriate PPE. But having some live burn demo or doing some kind of field component is really important, I think, to help people see how complicated burning is on the ground. And then also taking an in-person class for 24 hours can be pretty sterile, and people can start zoning out. So even if you just do a field trip to go look at an area that's burned, I think that could enhance some of the learning of the participants. And North Carolina takes a really unique approach, I think, to doing their field visits. So they identify 2 areas that are very similar in terms of their forest conditions, structural complexity. And they have the students walk through the unburned unit and write a burn plan. And then they go into the area that was burned but had similar conditions beforehand. And they have the person who wrote the burn plan for the burn unit talk about what considerations they took into effect, what fire behavior was surprising to them. And that's a way to still get people in the field without, having them carry a drip torch if that's just not feasible. Another concern that some states have is experienced burners were they didn't like that it was going to now be easy for other people to burn because they had to spend a career getting up to the level of RxB2, or they've been burning for years and now they're like, I don't have to go through kind of a remedial course when I already have a lot of experience. So that's where some of the fast track to certification can help address the concern of experienced burners in the state. But you have to consider, how are you going to define experienced burner? And then what kind of documentation are you going to accept to prove prior experience? Because if people are burning with a nonprofit, they might not be an IQCS. They might not be able to produce the same kind of record. So you have to make a decision about, the standard of proof of prior experience. So given the lack of time, I will stop there. And if anybody has questions, feel free to email me.
Great, thank you so much, Meg. That's a fantastic overview. I did put a link, another link to the report in the chat box as well. And please do keep putting your questions in the chat. We'll try to capture those, and we'll leave some time at the end, hopefully, to circle back and get answers to all of those. All right, the next section of our agenda is going to be facilitated by Lenya Quinn-Davidson. She's a co-host and co-convener of this webinar today. And Lenya, if you would introduce yourself and take it away. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Emily. Well, my name is Lenya Quinn-Davidson, and I am a fire advisor with University of California Cooperative Extension here in the North Coast of California. And I'm also the director of the Northern California Prescribed Fire Council, and have worked on prescribed fire-related issues for about a decade. And this topic has been of great interest to me, and I've been involved in the development of the program in California, which I'll talk about a little later in this program. But right now, we're going to hear about some existing programs in Ohio and in Florida. And I think this will be really helpful. I know for me, as someone who's actually working on developing a program right now, it's really interesting to be able to look at these existing programs and hear from those folks about how they came to be, what are some of the elements of their programs, and what would they do if they could do it again? What would they do differently or do the same? So we've asked these two guys to join us today and share some thoughts. And we'll start off with Ohio and hearing from Greg Guest. And we're going to have about 10 minutes, Greg, for you to share with us. And we shared with you some questions that we were hoping you could get at. So, you could just go for it with the 10 minutes, and maybe I'll prod you a little bit if I feel like we have certain questions that we really want to hear about that you're not hitting on. But I'll just turn it over to you.
Okay, well, yeah, like I say, feel free to ask me questions if I go over something, but I'll try to stick to your suggestions a little bit. But our program has been in existence since 2000, and it's really an outgrowth of what was the state law, and gave the state forester the sole ability to do waivers to the fire laws in the state. And over time, originally that was used for, essentially burn permits. And, just over time, that kind of transitioned into being more of a prescribed burning permission. And there weren't really any good rules on that, so we kind of had to make it up as we went along. And about 2000 brought a lot of interagency partners together to really stand up a program. And that's what became of that. And we stole a lot of stuff from Florida and the other states down south that were doing it at the time. In our state, we didn't have any one big incident that caused, a lot of property damage or anything like that. It was more of getting in front of things, so that, we had a program in place, and we could address the questions we got about why we allowed some people to burn and not others. So provided a little bit of structure to it. But there's nothing in our state law that gives anybody any particular immunity if you're a prescribed burn manager. It's really never been litigated, so we're not sure where we fall in the spectrum there. But one thing we did have was willingness of the partners involved to really embrace the program. In our state, we had a lot of small nonprofits or park districts that were getting into prairie restoration and little, small scale ecological restoration projects and wanting to do burning. So this was, some training we could give them. They traditionally didn't have a lot of or any wildfire experience. So this was a structured program we could put them through, and at least they'd have something going out the door, and then where possible we could mentor them in the future and help them build their programs. As far as benefits, like I say, we don't really get any liability benefits in our state, but it's the only way that somebody gets a burn waiver, really, except for some other limited circumstances. If you're going to burn during the fire season, you've got to be a prescribed burn manager. So, and that kind of a backdoor way is if you're somebody doing cost share projects under a farm bill or something like that, you're going to have to be a burn manager. So that's really our carrot. As far as our course setup, it's just a 30-hour course. So we set it up to be done in a week, and includes some basic fire suppression, includes ecology, burn plan writing to meet our requirements, and some operations as far as how to run a burn. Our training is really meant to serve a small scale type 3, not very complex burn that people get into a lot of these park districts and things like that. There's hopefully not a lot of risks involved. We don't do a lot of babysitting of that, and we just try to get across to agencies are going to need to babysit themselves and realize when they need higher level people to run the burns. We don't have any task books that are required. We are looking at possibly implementing some of that in the future, but there's nothing really there right now for that. We don't do a formal renewal, but when somebody gets certified, their certification is good for 5 years. And just how we monitor that is every time they ask for a waiver, we go back and check. And if they've had 2 burns as a burn boss in the last 5 years, or participated in 5 burns in 5 years, then we'll continue to issue them waivers. So it's like a rolling thing. We are getting into some problems there as time has gone on, and we get a number of burn seasons in a row that aren't very good. A lot of people are falling off on their currency. So we are looking in the future of either rolling some kind of short task book or some kind of other process to keep them renewed so we don't have to put people back through the whole course. Other things that we're here for me to talk about, I'm not sure that our prescribed burn program necessarily increases the amount of burning in our state. And maybe there's a way it could. I think probably job one is just making sure everybody has a baseline understanding and understands the expectations of meeting the standards of the program. One thing we've started leaning on a lot more since this program started is our state prescribed burn council, and finding ways for them to participate more, keep this an interagency process, use the steering committee of that organization as kind of the guiding force behind the program. And that's increased, the buy-in from a lot of the agencies. They feel like they're represented. And what I do hope for in the future is that we can develop a better mentoring program that people can use. There's not a lot of that right now. If you don't belong to an agency that's got a real developed program and a large amount of employees, you're kind of on your own. So we'd like to develop that more. As far as other states that are looking into this, I would just guide that, the more partners you can get on board at the start and to help guide it, the more buy-in you're going to have in the future. And that could be, I think it's been a big part of our success and lack of complaining about everything is, most people felt like they at least had some role in developing the program. So that's helped it be successful. That was most of, I guess, what I had prepared. If you've got
great
follow-up from you, do.
Yeah, do you know, Greg, how many people are certified in the state of Ohio?
Like I said, this is something we're kind of building as we go. And, we think there's probably a little over 300 people right now that could still get a waiver. but we kind of just check it as we go. So as people request waivers, we look at them individually and say, okay, they're good. So we don't, go through and just clean the list a lot. So it's something in that neighborhood.
Okay. And so when folks are teaching this class, is there a cost for that? Like what does that look like if I'm trying to sign up to take the course?
We do it on the cheap. So it's like $80 for the week, and pretty much that's paying for the printing costs and the lunches we provide during the week. So, we'll take that, and everybody that helps teach it is agency or volunteer. So we get a lot of buy-in from partner groups to help us with that. So we do probably half of the course, give or take, is Division of Forestry employees presenting, and the other half are our partner agencies helping us out.
Great. Well, good. Well, I think we could hold some of the other questions and discussion for the end because we have time for that then. So maybe we'll move and hear about Florida. And thanks so much, Greg, for sharing with us. That was super informative, especially on the heels of Meg's presentation, which was also really helpful. So let's hear from John Sadler in Florida, and kind of the same set of questions for you, and take it away.
All right, I do have a presentation. Can I share? Will I be able to share?
Yeah, you should be able to just share your screen if you move your cursor on the bottom. Yep.
All right, let's see. Is that working?
Yep.
See the presentation? All right, so.
Yep, that's good.
All right, so in Florida, anyway, I'm John Sadler, prescribed fire manager with the Florida Forest Service. I've been doing this for about 15 years, so I'm pretty well ingrained in our process. We've been doing certified burners since 1987, so I wasn't around when it started, but just kind of give you a brief history. So, conditions that led to our program, people in Florida have been using fire for eons, even before Europeans came. The natives were using it, and it never really went away in Florida, and everything was good until I guess air conditioning was invented and people started moving to Florida. And so in the 70s and 80s, with a lot of people moving in, the people that were moving in were from areas where fire as a management tool had been kind of lost, and people weren't doing it, and they didn't really understand it. And there was increasing lawsuits. And so it got to the point where in the late 80s, the Florida Supreme Court actually had a ruling that had some pretty obvious things that, using prescribed fire is an inherently dangerous process. The landowner is liable, and that liability is not transferable. So if you're a landowner and you hire somebody to come and do a burn for you, and there's a problem, then not only the person that did the burn, but you as a landowner, you're liable as well. And so it was kind of getting to the point where it was getting difficult for people to burn. And like I said, we do a lot of burning. I was looking through some notes to get ready for this, and even back in the 70s and 80s, we were burning around 2 million acres a year in Florida, and we still continue to do that today, on average, a little over 2 million acres. So in response, the people that do the burning, they came together and they formed these prescribed fire councils. The first one was actually formed in 1974 down in South Florida, but then in the 80s, we had a North Florida Council meeting, a North Florida Council and a Central Florida Council. And they come together and, so, and what was kind of interesting about it is it was a very diverse group that came together. People that wouldn't normally agree with things or talk to each other. You had conservationists, preservationists, timber companies, ranchers, public agencies at all levels. They might have different views about how to manage land or what to use land for, but they all agreed that that fire was an important part of that. And so they come together and they, form these councils. And in 1987 was when the Florida Forest Service, or Division of Forestry back then, developed the first certification program. And it was kind of a grandfather thing. It was a one-day deal. Everybody that was doing it had been burning, and they kind of got certified. And it didn't really, at that point, it didn't really mean a lot. It wasn't until 1990 when legislation was passed that became known as the Prescribed Fire Act of 1990, which was kind of the foundation for the laws and protections that we have today. It's been modified a few times over the years, but that was kind of the basis of it. And so in Florida, as a certified burner, what are your benefits? So you get more opportunities to burn. One of our, if we're issuing burns, if the weather's good, then we'll issue to anybody that calls to get an authorization. We don't really have, anybody in Florida can get a burn authorization. You're not required to be certified to get one. But if the weather's marginal, it's a little dry, a little windy, we might say certified burners only, so they get more opportunities to burn. You do get extended burning hours. It's about 3 more hours. If you're not certified, your fire has to be out 1 hour before sunset. If you're certified, you get 2 hours after sunset, so you get a little more time there. Also, if you're burning as a certified burner, you can't be shut down if your burn is a nuisance. So if you're just bothering somebody with your smoke, legally, we can't shut you down for that. There's some nuances there. You get into public relations, but it's written in the law. And it's also considered a right of the landowner if you're a certified burner to burn. And then, of course, the liability protection is a big one that a lot of people sign up for. Our current program, there are no prerequisites to take the classroom version. If you do want to do the self-study, you do have to be experienced, and we've got several levels of experience. I think she mentioned that earlier. If you're certified in another state, or if you've done burning in Florida, you can take the self-study course. They're essentially the same course, just one of them is a self-study course. It is 24 hours, three full days. Sometimes we'll do it over 4 days. We'll start out in the afternoon and then do 2 full days and then another afternoon, depending on the location. The chapters that are included in our curriculum are listed there. I'm not going to read through all those. You guys can see that, but it's, your basic things. I guess, we do have a specific chapter on holding and contingency. That might be, a little different. We kind of emphasize, having a plan, having, what are you going to do if something goes awry? And then we spend a significant portion on the planning and evaluation. Let's see. So task books, we do not have a task book, but we do require experience to get certified. So if you go into taking the class and you haven't had any burn experience, then we require burn experience subsequent to taking the course. And then once you've met that, then you can do, then you have to show proficiency. So once you've taken the class, even if you have experience, you still have to show proficiency. So you have to write a burn plan, call us up, we'll send somebody out, take a look at the burn plan, look at the burn area, and then you have to conduct that burn. And we may or may not be present during the whole thing, but it's just a way to show proficiency that you are filling out the burn plan properly. You have all your fire lines in place, you have adequate fire personnel and equipment to contain your fire. So we have to do that before the certification is complete. So it's not just taking the class, you have to show the proficiency. We do have a renewal process. It is more of a maintenance than a renewal. So, and we have 2 separate things that you have to do. So we have 8 hours of continuing education that you have to do every 5 years. And separate from that, you also have to either conduct 2 burns or participate in 5 burns within the previous 5 years. And that is it's a rolling clock, similar to what Michigan has. So has our program increased use of fire? As I mentioned, fire has been in Florida for a long time. A lot of it, like I said, even back in the middle of the century, there was millions of acres being burned. I would say, if anything, our certified burn program has enabled us to maintain it. I was looking through some of this data. In 1970, I guess the Florida population was 12 million people. There might have been 80, I can't remember. But now we're over 22 million now, and we get roughly 1,000 people a day moving into Florida. So having our certified burner program, I think, has enabled us to maintain that high level of fire use, even though we're getting more and more people in. What would I do different? Like I said, ours has evolved over the years. We did have the field days, and we went back, and it was the weather. And it wasn't just, the weather being bad, like rain, where we couldn't burn. We actually had the opposite. I remember we did some classes and we conducted burns when we shouldn't have been burning. The humidity was like 15%. We had kind of high winds, but it was a pretty big machine to get everybody gathered and getting around. So we kind of did it anyway when we shouldn't have. It would have been a better lesson for the students to not do the burn that day, as an example of a proper way to do it. So we did some evaluation, and we decided to drop that. But the thing they do in North Carolina sounds really good. I would encourage maybe going out in the field to look at an area and write as part of the burning, as the planning process. That would be good. And if I were to design one from the scratch, I would do what you all are doing now. I would review what other people are doing, take notes, and learn from others. No point in reinventing the wheel. Again, things to warn against. Live fire is part of the program. That's tricky. And then, if you're going to have, especially if you're going to have renewal criteria, you need to have a good database for that. We have just the broadcast burners. We have about 1,700 of those in Florida. If you put in the pile burners, it takes us up to about 2,500 people. So we started out using spreadsheets, but now we have our burn permitting program tracks all the burn authorizations. So tracking people's participation, tracking if they get the authorization, that's easy to track because it's in our computer system. But if they're participating, that's a lot harder for us to track. And then the continuing education, that's another thing that's tricky to track. So, if you're going to do that route, you really need to plan ahead, and I would go ahead and get that in place from the beginning, because that really helps out. So sorry I went over on time, but
no, that was perfect.
okay.
No, I think we're right on track, John. That was really helpful. And those things that you would warn against are definitely things in our California process. We thought a lot about that live fire component and how tricky that is to incorporate. So that was great. So we just got to hear from 2 established programs, including the country's oldest program in Florida, which is such an inspiration, having thousands of people certified. Now we're going to move into hearing from some of these programs that are developing across the country, and mostly in the West. The 3 examples that we're going to share today are California, Washington, and New Mexico, in that order. And I think I'll just go ahead and kick it off, Emily, if that's okay, since California's going first. Is there anything you wanted to say before we jump in?
Nope, that's perfect, Lania. Thanks.
Okay, great. So I'm going to share my screen because I put together some slides. And then I do see that some questions are coming in the chat, and we will get to those during our open discussion after these 3 short presentations. So keep them coming. We're keeping track of them. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. And can you all see that?
Yes.
Emily, can you see that?
It's good.
Okay, great. Okay, so in California, we're in the midst of rolling out a state certified burn boss program, and we're calling it the CARX. and it came out of the really intense fire seasons that we had, particularly in 2017, when we had the Thomas Fire down in Southern California, and we had the wine country fires here in Northern California. And in later that year after those fires, Hannah Beth Jackson, who is a state senator down in the Santa Barbara area where the Thomas Fire was, put together a bill, Senate Bill 1260, that ended up passing through and getting signed into law that September by Governor Brown. And that bill really incorporated a lot of different ideas from other bills, and then also just from a lot of the dialogue and policy work that had been going on in California for many years before that. So it was entirely focused on prescribed fire, and has a lot in it, but I think some of the most notable things are really the increased opportunity for CAL FIRE to collaborate and support prescribed fire, or collaborate on and support prescribed fire on private land. So not just through their own program, but to actually be able to partner with other agencies, with other landowners, with private contractors. There's a lot in there that gives them more opportunity. But then we also saw this piece about the development of a state certified burn boss program. And that's actually the language that's used in the bill, which is interesting. It's not a certified burner program, it's a burn boss certification program. And that may seem like semantics, but it actually ended up being kind of important as we started working on it, because that term burn boss, of course, holds a lot of clout. So the time frame for this is that legislation did pass in September of 2018. The curriculum development process happened last summer. They pulled together a cadre of folks. I was one of those people. I think there were probably about 12 of us. And we met for a total of 3 weeks to develop this curriculum. And a lot of the people who served on that curriculum committee were private practitioners, because this is really intended for the non-fire professional. This is not for agency folks who are working in fire. This is for private sector people, landowners, private contractors. And so they really filled up the cadre with private folks, which I thought was really cool. So we got a lot of different perspectives there. The curriculum's been in the approval process since September of 2019 when we finished up with it. And it's expected to be fully finalized by the state in July. So hopefully just in the next couple of weeks, we'll see it come out and be fully finalized, and then roll out as an official program that is led by state fire training in January of next year. So that's the time frame for it. So I think one of the big things, like when Meg and I talked when she was working on her report, I became really focused on just what's the benefit of the program. You know, like in California, we already have a simple negligence law. So we do have some liability standards there that are in place for anyone who's burning. So we don't require a certification program in order to be able to use prescribed fire. So I was really curious in my role on the curriculum development committee, and what is going to be the benefit to the burner? Because I, as a private burner now, can move forward and do a prescribed fire project under a simple negligence law with no problem. So, you know, what does this afford to me for me to go through this process? And there are opportunities in that Senate bill. It talks about liability sharing with CAL FIRE on prescribed fire. So even though we're not getting a gross negligence law out of that bill, there are new opportunities to share liability with CAL FIRE, and that'll be outlined through the permit process, because we do have a permit process for prescribed fire here. So that remains to be seen what that'll actually look like, and we'll know more as the program rolls out. But I think that's going to be the big carrot here, is that there's this opportunity to share liability. There's also potential for suppression support. So this again is kind of hinted at in the bill. And then we've had conversations with the director of CAL FIRE that also spoke to this. And the idea that if you're a state certified burn boss and you're operating under your permit parameters and your burn plan, and you require suppression support for an escape, that you wouldn't get a bill. And honestly, I think for a lot of us who do this kind of private burning, that's the real fear, you know, is that we're going to have something happen where we're going to need to call in additional resources, and then we're going to get a huge bill. So there is possibility that that kind of suppression support would be at no cost to the state certified burn boss who's operating, within the parameters of the permit and the burn plan. So that's I think that's a huge deal. And then, there could be access to prescribed fire insurance, because in California, we actually don't have a state standard. In the absence of this program, we have no state standard for prescribed fire qualifications for a private burner. So it's really hard if you're a retired fire professional, a retired burn boss, even at the federal level, to get any kind of insurance to do this work. So if we can have a state standard that folks can adhere to, that might open up opportunities. And Dave Lasky might talk about that. That's something he's been working on a lot across the country. I see from the landowner side that this is pretty exciting, because if it means we could have more qualified contractors to plan and lead burns, that would be great. We have a real need for that in California. We have a lot of folks who are interested in using prescribed fire and even hiring folks to do it for them on their properties, but there just aren't that many private contractors who are qualified, in a state system or in a federal system to come in and help out with that. So I think that's going to be really exciting. And also reducing bottlenecks for cost share programs like with NRCS and with the Fish and Wildlife Service and CAL FIRE, some of these programs where you can get funding to have a burn plan developed, but then who do you hire to do that? So again, it'll be just great to have more people available to help out with this stuff. And then of course, the landowner could also become a state certified burn boss and have the opportunity to share liability with CAL FIRE and to develop projects collaboratively with their local prescribed burn associations or with CAL FIRE. Now, from the professional side, I see a lot of benefit. We have a lot of retired fire professionals who are interested in engaging with this kind of work and would like to maintain their qualifications or become qualified with the state system. So I think that'll be really good. And then also it's just a realistic certification route for non-fire professionals. So again, like folks like me or a lot of the people on this call who don't necessarily work for a fire management agency, but have experience and want to be able to get certified and help out with projects. And then also to be able to get insurance, share liability, and to expand professional portfolios to include burn planning and implementation. Those are all huge benefits. So this program, the way that the Curriculum Development Committee designed it, and this is kind of what we're looking at for prereqs. We're waiting for approval, so this is in draft form until it rolls out next month, basically. But I'm pretty confident at this point that this will be what the prereqs look like. And you can see that it's not a small burden of prerequisites. There are a lot of classes. These are just the prereqs to get into the course. So it's a huge amount of work, really, and a lot of coursework. There are some elements where you could prove equivalent experience for the firing and for the leadership requirements, but it's still, even on top of that, there's just a lot of coursework. And this was one of the main concerns I'll talk about in a few minutes, but definitely one of my big concerns was how much there is there. Then there's a 40-hour in-person class, and that's the actual course for the certification that covers all of these different topics. And again, that's another week of coursework that someone's going to have to take to be part of this program. And then after the class, there is a task book to prove competency, and then an annual refresher that's 4 hours, that you would have to take every year to maintain your certification. So some of the concerns that I have with this, and I'll just run through these quickly, I know I'm running out of time, is this too rigorous? This is for the private person, the private practitioner. Are people going to want to participate when they have to take so many courses and there's such a high bar for getting into the program? There's also a lot of experience requirement because this is not for the entry-level practitioner. It's really for folks who have a lot of prescribed fire experience. And there's no good way to get a lot of prescribed fire experience easily across California. So you have to be able to really seek that out. And I think we all need to help create those opportunities, and we do. The amount of time to meet the prereqs and take all, there's just a lot of in-person course time. So those are some of the concerns I have, and the cost is going to be variable because the system in California is based on state fire training. You have an instructor who applies to teach the class, and then they can offset all of their costs by charging basically whatever they want to host the class. So a 5-day class with a cadre of instructors could end up being pretty expensive. So I think I'll stop there because I'm kind of out of time, but that's what's going on in California. And I look forward to hearing from Washington next. Kara, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, thanks Lanya, and thanks everyone else for their presentation so far. It's been great to hear what's happening in other states. My name is Kara Karbowski. I work for the Washington Resource Conservation and Development Council. I am the coordinator for the Washington Prescribed Fire Council, co-lead for the Washington Dry Forest Fire Learning Network. I lead the TREX programs here in Washington. I also support the Washington Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network. So today I'm going to talk about the Washington Certified Prescribed Burn Manager Program, kind of how that was developed and where we're at right now. I also have some Washington Department of Natural Resources leading the development of this program, the implementation. There's a couple folks on the phone too, so if I mess something up, I'm sure they'll jump in and let me know. And if there's any further questions about program and its development, they might be able to help out with that as well. So to provide a little bit of context and background, I can go back pretty far to set kind of like the political and social stage for how we got to this point in Washington of having or being in the process of developing a program. But really, I think like in contrast to Florida, we haven't had fire used as much as it has there. We haven't had that culture, and it hasn't been a land management tool as used as frequently as it has in other places. I mean, definitely some of our laws and regulations that were passed in the 90s and early 2000s have really reduced the ability to use it as a tool in the state. And really it was our sort of west side, wet side, large industrial forest owners using it, and then kind of like on the east side, dry forest side of the state, are like Forest Service basically using it. But we transitioned. That's kind of been, through various means, we've been that's been trending upwards, and we had kind of our major wildfire season in 2014 and 2015 in Washington that really has created that spark of movement. Not only just on prescribed fire, but on forest health, community wildfire risk mitigation, and it has really started, that forward momentum within, the public and our agencies and our legislature on a lot of these issues. And I think there's this general sense that, these all lands, all hands, all tools are needed to be on deck to move forward to address these issues. So from our 2014, 2015 record-breaking wildfire seasons, there was a huge influx of bills, but there was only a couple that really came out of that. One is developing a forest health treatment assessment, which is our 20-year Eastern Washington Forest Health Strategic Plan. But it's really set in some of that context of prioritizing acres and setting a goal of treating 1 million acres with thinning and prescribed fire. So really calling out that need to be using fire as a tool. And then we also had some legislation that moved forward a forest resiliency burning pilot project. And really that pilot project to identify issues that were reducing or that we needed to increase the use of prescribed fire. And so that really engaged stakeholders to share what issues and what steps could be taken to increase the use of prescribed fire, one of which was establish a burn manager certification program. And so those recommendations came out in 2017. In the following 2018 legislation session, the Washington Prescribed Fire Council, along with the Washington Farm Forestry Association, which is small forest landowners in the state, along with other partners, drafted a bill, and it was unanimously approved, and that became the Certified Prescribed Burn Manager bill. So that's how, like, the long and short of how we got to this point in Washington. I think there's lots of things happening in Washington, and so there's like this rising water, rising boats, other efforts and support around forest health and wildfire mitigation and concerns is really creating a better understanding of fire in general and the need for prescribed fire for sure. So with that, the Washington, that legislation, really mandated the Washington Department of Natural Resource develop a certified prescribed bird manager program. And that program is currently in development. The timeline has shifted due to COVID. I think there was the initial plan was maybe to have our first course this spring, but that's been delayed. So we're currently in the process of, they are, and I'm, partners and others are supporting, but currently finalizing that outline, developing the curriculum and those policies. We hosted a few meetings with stakeholders this winter and spring to get their thoughts and feedback on the program and some initial outlines, draft outlines. So the hope, again, is to have the first in-person course this fall, to have a few people fully certified by next spring. And I think the idea too is to have this fall course be kind of the test course for, especially trying to move through, get some of our experienced burners in the state who want to become certified, have them go through this first course to really test it out, see where some issues within the curriculum might be, or where we need to make improvements, or, to move forward and really open it up further. The main benefit to this program is definitely the lower liability standard. Washington is a simple negligent state, but becoming certified in this program will confer a gross negligence. So that's definitely like the big carrot going into this. I think I should be clear, the program is definitely currently in development. Nothing's finalized right now. And so anything that I'm talking about, that's being proposed is being proposed, it's tentative, nothing's been finalized. So, but there's some other potential proposed benefits that could include the opportunity to burn on the weekend. We have a weekend burn bans here in Washington at certain times of the year. So that could be one possibility, is to allow certified burners to burn during that time, as well as looking at maybe like a streamlined burn permitting and smoke approval process. And I think kind of similar to what Lenya spoke about, I really think, and this isn't really the benefit of certification, but I think the benefit of the program is having an access to training and learning of non-fire professionals and non-fire practitioners. Really create an opportunity for private landowners and other folks to get that learning that isn't tied to NWCG and isn't professional fire practitioners. So I talk about that a little bit as far as like the structure of our course, because I think that was probably our main topic of discussion with stakeholders and others, is really comes down to that rigor of the curriculum, of the requirements of the program and the prerequisites to even enter the program. Was that same concern of letting just anyone enter the program with no fire background or experience. And definitely you hear that often from our folks who have that, our professional firefighters have that background. There's concern that if folks come in who don't have that professional background and they go and start a fire and it goes out, or it gets out of control, what will that do? So that was definitely like the main impetus for that discussion. But the intent of the legislation, though, is actually to create a non-mandatory program. There is no state standard for training or certification to be able to conduct a burn right now, as it is. So anybody, if you were able to get a permit, could conduct a burn regardless of experience or training. So I think that's part of our push to like have this open to everyone, is, it is non-mandatory. It's to provide some incentive to go through this program and create a base of learning and understanding about how to implement prescribed burns. So with that, the course will be open. As of right now, the course will be open to anyone, even those with no experience or fire background, and no prerequisites to attend the training. I think the curriculum will be similar to, I'm sure, other states that's being developed, but, just like how to implement burn, smoke management, those types of things. I know that our DNR folks here are also building their curriculum based off the work done in North Carolina and Florida as well. Always looking, I think it's been really helpful to have these other programs to look at as we develop this course in Washington. And so I think the general idea is this will be maybe like a 2-day course with, eventually we'll have an online pre-work section, and then an in-person course one day, maybe one day in a field day. Eventually we'll get to that point once we can invest the technology time into getting that. There will be opportunity for burn bosses for current NWCG, RXB1s, RXB2s to test out of the course and obtain certification through taking the final exam. There will be a certification, there will have to be implement a burn, 1 or 2 certification burns. There won't be a task book. We'll likely have more of a certification checkoff form similar to what is in North Carolina, which is pretty basic, a 1-page sheet. That's have you met, these basic, you can look on their website, the North Carolina Forest Service website, to see that. And then there'll be the recertification under the program will require some burn experience, like being on a burn or implementing a burn, or as well as some continuing education and a knowledge test to recertify. So, as I said, we're still in the development of some of these processes and policies that will guide the development of the program. But I think the general sense is that we're really trying to move towards a program that's open as much as we can to everyone. And I think that was really our main concern, or my main concern, going into the development of this program, was to have something that would be too narrow and wouldn't be as useful or wouldn't be as open to everyone. Just because I think this is an opportunity to open the door and create opportunities of learning about prescribed fire and how to implement it for those who don't have access to the professional fire and NWCG courses. So we'll see where we move forward. Hopefully this fall we'll have a course ready to go.
Awesome. Thanks, Kara. We'll definitely look forward to hearing more about how that first sort of test session works out.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move over now and hear from Dave Lasky about what's happening in New Mexico. Dave, if you could introduce yourself and take us away.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Emily. I'm going to try and keep to 5 minutes because I know there's a lot of good conversation to be had. I'm Dave Lasky. I'm the Director of Fire Management for the Forest Stewards Guild, and then I'm also an officer on the New Mexico Prescribed Fire Council. And I want to acknowledge that there are a lot of folks on the call today who participated in this whole process. Like Kara, I'm concerned that I'll goof up and they'll need to correct me. But in 2019, House Memorial 42 passed the State House in New Mexico. And the purpose of the memorial was to explore ways to expand prescribed fire on private lands in New Mexico. And the working group created a group of stakeholders to develop a report to the legislature on expansion strategies for prescribed fire. And I think there's a fair bit of parallels between what's been done in California, Washington, and what New Mexico saw. And the working group saw that there were a lot of interrelated issues, and obviously certified burner training was one of those major issues. So the report covers a lot more than just certified burners, but I think what's germane to today is that the working group discovered that training and certification is definitely tied to the accessibility of liability insurance, and that it would be hard to get good, inexpensive insurance in New Mexico without a training program. Also, that New Mexico is an enormously diverse state, both ecologically and culturally, and that a training program had to meet the needs of both many different fuel types, but also many different types of burners on private lands in New Mexico. The conclusion also was that achieving NWCG certifications really weren't practical for most private land burners in New Mexico. There was also a really important acknowledgement that there's a very long history of agricultural burning in New Mexico, and the working group didn't want to do anything that would adversely impact the historically burning agricultural burners. The group discovered a number of open questions, such as should statutory liability protection be tied to training? How would we track the training, and how would training be tracked, and who would do it? Where would the money come from to do a training program? And a couple of conclusions were come to by the working group, and they're put in the report. Certainly, I think first and foremost, is that a new training program could itself become a barrier to prescribed fire implementation if the training program wasn't thoughtfully implemented. There was a recommendation that 2 different levels of certification be created, one for pile burning and then one for pile burning and broadcast burning. Training would include both coursework and field work. Participation in the program would be voluntary, but would hopefully give some liability relief to the burner. That the training would be non-NWCG, but would be appropriately rigorous. And that the New Mexico State University Extension Service would be the logical organization to handle the curriculum delivery. There was a recommendation of creating a training and oversight board that would be a broad group of subject matter experts from both public and private stakeholders, and that any development of a state curriculum would be a collaborative process amongst those stakeholders. And so I think it's worth mentioning that the report is complete, and that's as far as the process has gone to date. Like I said, I'm going to try and keep this to 5 minutes so that we can open the floor for other conversations.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Okay, so we have 15 minutes to start answering some of the questions, and Meg has done a great job, and some other folks too. I'm jumping in on some of these questions, but let's go back to some of them and dig in a little more. So one of the questions was about funding. And Meg, do you want to talk a little bit about what you wrote in the comments regarding funding for these programs?
Sure, absolutely. So several of the program managers that I interviewed said that funding was a significant barrier or challenge that they had to overcome because a lot of states, the legislator passed a prescribed burn law and it mandated agencies to create certification programs, but they never gave them like a line item specific to funding the program. And just like Greg was saying, where the costs are very nominal to participate in the certification, which I think is great because it allows a wider diversity of people to participate. But that means states don't recoup the cost of administering the program. Even in Texas, where it costs $500 to apply for certification every, I think it's 2 years, maybe every 3 years, the program manager said that nowhere near covers the cost of administering the program. In Colorado, the program manager estimated that it costs $30,000 to develop the course, and that includes like the course book. And then the Department of Natural Resources in Minnesota did an analysis. They don't have a certified burn program, but they've been considering it, and they estimated it would cost $50,000 to develop the program, plus $5,000 to teach each course, plus a significant amount of money to update their online program to track certified burners. So there definitely is a cost involved in developing the program, and then a lot of staff time from the agencies to supervise burns or teach the courses.
Great. Okay, thanks for that, Meg. Yeah, it's interesting in California. I mentioned it in my talk, but we don't really have funding for the program that's being developed here. I think there's funding at the state level just for like one person to help do the tracking. But as far as teaching the classes, all of those costs will be recouped in fees for the class. And I worried that the class is going to be close to maybe even $1,000 just for the 5-day class, which would be really expensive. So Emily put a great question in the chat, asking Dave to dig in a little deeper on the intersection of the training and insurance availability. And this is something he's been working on a lot and really relates to the certified burner topic. Dave, do you mind talking a little more about that?
Lenya, I'm always happy to talk. You don't laugh so loud. So we've been working with a number of partners in the insurance industry, trying to figure out how we could get widespread, cost-effective liability insurance for private land burners. And the insurance industry has come back with a couple of clear criteria that we as a community would need to meet for them to feel like they could offer appropriately priced liability insurance. First is they are only willing to insure certified burners. They're totally fine whether it's NWCG or state, but folks need to go through some type of certification program for them to feel comfortable. They also would require that any burn that would be insured would have to submit a burn plan, and that burn plan would be tied to, the template for that burn plan would be tied to the burner certification. So if you were doing a high complexity burn and you're an NWCG burn boss, you'd have to use an NWCG template. If you were a state certified burner and the state had a template, you could use that template. Also, burns would be required to complete a consequence analysis to look at the potential hazard, the financial hazard of the burn, and that policy cost for each burn would be tied to that potential consequence analysis. And that's still a little bit in development, but we'd be looking at things like how close a burn might be to a road and smoke impacts and stuff like that. And then finally, at least at this juncture, really we're only seeing underwriters who can contemplate $1 million of liability coverage. And I think in future years, hopefully we can see that limit increase. But right now, that's kind of what we're looking at. So I think the certified burner curriculum and getting states to stand behind certification is kind of like the only way probably to get private landowners empowered to be able to obtain cost-effective insurance. Is that answering the question, Melania?
Yeah, I think that's great. Emily, did that get at what you wanted to hear from Dave? I mean, I know we could talk about that topic for hours, but.
Yeah, it definitely did. Thank you, Dave. Yeah, there's a lot there, but that was a great summary.
Yeah, and thank you, Dave, for all your work on that. So there's an interesting question in here about the certifications being statewide or being based on ecology and fuel types. And this was something that came up in the work we were doing in California, where people were wondering, well, you know, if you're a burn boss who gets certified in Southern California, does that mean you're qualified to come up to Northern California and burn in an entirely different fuel type? You know, we agreed that you're getting certified as a burn boss who's able to evaluate the conditions and get the information you need to lead a burn successfully, or to determine that you don't feel comfortable leading a burn in a different area. So did that come up in other areas, or is that something some of these other programs have considered or thought about? Just to get at that question.
In Texas, they currently have certification for 5 different, like they've broken the state into 5 different regions, but they're planning to do away with that because it was just adding more complexity and making it harder for people from one part of the state to burn in other parts of the state, and they were just having a hard enough time even like verifying where people were burning. So what North Carolina has done to address that is they move around where they host the courses. So they'll do it in like the eastern part of the state or the western part of the state, and then when they do the field trip and some of the in-course stuff can even be tailored a little bit to the local conditions in the area. But besides what Texas has done but won't be doing anymore, there weren't states that had like regional or fuel type specific certification.
Okay, great. Thanks, Meg. Anyone else have anything to say about that, or? Okay, let's talk a little bit about NRCS. This is coming up a lot in the chat, and I think it is interesting how NRCS handles some of these issues. Does anyone from one of these other programs want to talk about how the NRCS relationship and funding works in their state? No? Okay. Well, I think it's interesting because NRCS, oh, Greg, did you have something you wanted to say in Ohio?
Well, I'm in a little bit of a danger zone here because I might not get all the particulars right, but I just thought I'd clarify a little bit. I mean, a lot of the burning in our state is CRP lands that, you know, are restored here or another, or somehow they're getting cost shares. So, you know, in our state, you know, there's a bar to be a TSP that has all these requirements, and there's not a lot of overlap between those people and the people that are required that are certified burn managers. So what ends up happening is a landowner will get cost share to do a burn treatment, and then they'll go out and find a contractor. And as long as the contractor meets the state qualifications to be a burn manager, which, you know, our certified managers would, they'll get cost share. But what they won't get is a cap plan funding to actually write the plan. So just to meet our state requirements, they'll have to have a plan with everything in it, but they won't actually get NRCS money to get that plan written, but they will get it for implementing. So if that's confusing enough, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, that's great. And Carolyn in Kansas says that NRCS allows landowners to burn their own land for conservation contract fulfillment without any training. And that in general, it's working well. And I think, you know, that's really the model that NRCS uses for most of their practices, you know, in EQIP and stuff. So it's actually been a big thing that I'm focused on here in California, because in California, NRCS has this additional layer of requirements and requires that a RxB2 lead burns for contract fulfillment in California, which is not their national standard. And, you know, I think it's interesting that you could have an NRCS contract to do timber stand improvement and not have to hire a licensed timber operator. But if you want to do a prescribed burn, you have to hire a federally qualified burn boss. And so I think there are some really interesting challenges and opportunities for NRCS funding to support prescribed fire. And certainly one of our priorities here with the Prescribed Fire Council in California is to address that. Did anyone else want to chime in on the NRCS issues or opportunities? No? Okay, great. Well, let's see. So we only have a few more minutes. Kara, you had a question and you answered it about engaging legislators to work on these issues. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, there was a question in the chat about how to engage with the legislature on, you know, moving forward with these. I'm probably not the best person to be to address that, but you know, I think one key component of that is the Prescribed Fire Council has been really key in that, just because we have such a diverse set of stakeholders. While like agency staff can't lobby, for example, we do have partners who have lobbying arms in their organizations that can help move those things forward. So I think the Nature Conservancy in Washington has been really helpful. Like I said, in that bill in 2018, the Washington Farm Forestry Association, which represents small forest landowners, was really important. So if you can find those partners who do have them, their legislative or, you know, legislative liaison lobbying arms, that can be really, really helpful to move these things forward. At the same time, you know, Jacob mentioned, as well, you know, like state employees or federal employees can't lobby, but I think there's still opportunities to educate and inform. And so I know through like TREX, for example, we've invited state legislators and staffers from congressional staffers as well to field trips to look at burns. And so I think there's opportunities there to start educating and informing and creating those relationships to be able to like, and I don't know how it works during the legislative session. That's definitely not my forte as far as the actual lobbying goes. But I think building those relationships and that understanding is like the first step.
Awesome. Well, that's probably all the time we have for questions. Thank you so much, Kara, and everyone who was answering questions. And huge thank you to all of our speakers today. This time went by really fast for me. That was a lot of information and really awesome to hear all of those different perspectives across the country. if there is interest in continuing these conversations and taking a deeper dive into any of the questions that have been raised or examining any existing programs more deeply, I am interested in hearing from you about that interest, and that we may convene additional conversations with probably a smaller group of folks around specific issues. So I'm going to put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me. Liz Rank was kind enough to post a link in the chat for where this recording will be posted once we have a process. So definitely grab that and check that out here in a day or so. Give me a chance to get it processed and posted. So thank you again to all of our speakers. We're going to go ahead and close out. Appreciate seeing everyone today.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Everyone take care.